What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Modern Craftsman. This week we have Chris Galvin, who is the CEO of Andersen Windows. He's been with Andersen for 20 years, started out as COO and now CEO for the last 14 months. We're going to talk about Chris's journey to CEO and how that relates to smaller companies, whether you're looking to grow within your company or maybe you are an owner that is looking to engage your team to grow into more leadership roles. Speaking of leadership, we're going to talk about leadership too.
We do. I'm just happy to be in Minnesota. It's lovely here.
It is beautiful.
It is warm. All I heard was that it's freezing. It snows a lot. We get here. It's like 75 degrees.
It's going to be
sweating.
80 tomorrow.
Yeah.
I didn't bring shorts.
We're going to be here for the next few days.
They said we could swim in the river.
I already did.
You did?
Yeah.
Dang.
Earlier. I got here early. I flew in early. We'll be here for a few days. We're going to tour their plant, all their facilities. We did a little tour today. We have some really fun content that may or may not include a cannon coming up. So
And maybe a teddy bear?
Possibly. That TBD, we still need to get the approval on that.
We did not get the approval from
No,
Chris.
we're waiting on that, though. I think we can pull some strings.
Okay.
But we have a lot of exciting content coming up. But thank you to the Andersen team for having us here, for putting us up, for partnering with us. It's been, so far, other than being a little bit tired, a really good experience. Chris was an amazing guest, really knowledgeable, super down to earth, very humble. I think you guys will enjoy the conversation and enjoy what comes out of this trip.
Are you saying you're tired because you woke up early?
Yes.
Oh.
And the time change.
It's an hour.
Yeah, I'm not used to it.
Well, either way. This podcast is brought to you by Andersen Windows. And again, big thank you for having us out here. Stay tuned for all that content.
Yeah, I don't think we have to say much more. This should be pretty self-explanatory.
This podcast is also brought to you by Buildertrend. Have you ever wondered how your construction company compares to other residential builders? What margins are your competitors working on, and how much do they take out as salary each year? And how do they get their clients?
The Association of Professional Builders has the answer to all these questions and more in their State of Residential Construction Industry Report. Hundreds of home builders across the world were surveyed, make it the most comprehensive industry report. Thanks to our friends at Buildertrend, it can be yours for free today.
So download your free copy at buildertrend.com/APB 2023. Inside are also insights from industry leaders, including Buildertrend CEO and co-founder Dan Houghton.
Chris, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. First podcast ever.
At the Andersen headquarters.
Yeah, we're honored to have you here, obviously, taking time out of your day. For myself and Nick, you can feel free to hop in here, but for our listeners who don't know who you are, could we just get like a Cliff Notes version of who you are, upbringing, childhood, how you kind of ended up here?
Sure. Well, first of all, welcome Nick and Tyler to
our
Andersen corporate headquarters. So we could fill up this 90 minutes or so with my background here, but I was born and raised in a small town in central Wisconsin, and a town of 2,000, Abbotsford, Wisconsin, and I was raised with 3 other siblings, and ended up playing a lot of sports in high school. Ended up going on to college, to the University of Wisconsin La Crosse, where I studied finance. Was my degree, but I'll tell you my path to get to finance went through elementary education, art. And business, and so I explored a lot of different areas along the way. Ended up with a finance degree. Ended up coming out of school, and I went to work in the investment field. Did that for a year or so, and then into banking, and worked in that business or that industry again for another year or so, and then went back to graduate school. I went to the University of Minnesota up here at the Carlson School, and graduated. And ended up taking a role with Target Corporation. I was with Target Corporation about 8 years. I was supporting all different aspects of the business. Ended up in their treasury organization. It's a fast-growing time for Target, putting up hundreds of stores. And so we were looking at ways to finance that growth. And then I got a call from a friend who had been interviewing at Andersen and said, boy, I don't know that I'm a great fit for this role, but I think you'd be a great fit to come over to Andersen. And so I wasn't looking, but I decided to take the take the call and stopped over, had a couple of interviews, and I found just a incredibly special place, and knew this was going to be different than anything I'd ever experienced before. Came in and was involved in helping to run the treasury organization, and we were going through a really interesting time during that time. We're seeing a lot of inflection in the business, and both on the bottom end and the high end of the business, and so I got immediately pulled into doing mergers and acquisitions work. So looking for ways to find other targets to be able to build on our capabilities for our product portfolio, and was able to do that for years. And I supported many, many aspects of the business. I've had great opportunities to be able to lead our manufacturing organization, supply chain, logistics, and a couple of our different businesses along the way. Last year, I stepped into the role of Chief Operating Officer, and I've been, I think it's about 14 weeks into the role as CEO, so it's great to have both of you here.
You have a fair amount of titles. I didn't know which one to call you. It's like President, CFO, CEO. All of that stem from a financial education and background. Did you know early on that you wanted to get into finance, or that finance would lead you here?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I didn't early on, but I did have some advice early on that having a finance background and knowing how the economic engine of a business works will benefit you in any role that you're in.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that drew me to finance is that you really get a good sense for what's going on across a business, and can really migrate to many different roles with a good, solid finance background.
Who gave you that advice?
Well, I actually one of my professors, as I was going through school, looking at elementary education and art and business, and that was one of my accounting professor gave me that advice.
It's interesting that you analyze a business that way. I was reading an interview with you where you were looking at the overall health of a business and looking at how the government's controlling that, and I never really put that into perspective, that you were analyzing it from a financial perspective and how telling that can be for the overall health of an entire business. And even looking at your career, how you've worked your way up and you've stayed with one company this entire time. I never, until looking into your background, realized that was the trajectory there, right? That you're going to have a financial background and then work your way up to where you have today, within essentially two companies, Target and Andersen's primarily been most of your career.
Right.
It's a really interesting perspective to stay with those two companies and have a financial background and work your way up there. I never really looked at it from that point of view before.
I think that, this is something we've talked about quite a bit, and in residential, a lot of us are owner operators, and we've had a couple builders on the podcast that do come up through finance, and they operate their business very differently. And I would say, and I know they're listening, so I'm going to say this try to say it in the right way, is that they're less show and they're very business and numbers oriented, which is, truthfully probably more successful than a lot of the artists out there. And I think that my point in saying that is a lot of people don't spend enough time understanding the financial health of a business, or even just understanding how to read a P&L and what that means.
Yeah. Well, you talk about something that's really important, and the room for error is even less. You think about the hundreds of thousands of contractors that are out there today, and the room for error when you're quoting and when you're bidding your jobs and then conducting your work and following up on whether it's financing or collecting and materials. There's so many financial aspects that, and again, because many contractors out there or others in the trade tend to be sole owners within their own business, that they've got to be good. They have to understand that, and oftentimes we don't think about that as part of finance, but it is part of finance, and knowing all the different costs in your business, the time you spend, but what you have to do to make a profit at the end of the day.
Chris, the article that Tyler is referencing and the relationship to the financial health of, say, Andersen and what's going on in the world, we'll say, what is your role, and what is your role in understanding, how the world's changing and how that impacts your business. Like, what are you focused on, or what are you paying attention to that could directly impact you?
Yeah, well, what I would tell you is that I think the number of inputs have drastically grown over the last number of years in terms of how well read you need to be, how current you need to be with the current economy. The housing industry is driven by so many different factors, and whether it's been the pandemic that impacted us 3 years ago, whether it's labor challenges, whether it is the supply chain networks that impacted everybody, but certainly all of us in housing, all the way down to now this mini banking crisis that just happened a little over a month or two ago. There are so many different factors that impact housing, and you think about the environments that we're kind of going through right now. We're on the front end of a bit of a housing recession, and there is we've always seen in the past, housing has led the industry or the economy into a recession and always leads it out. And so making sure we understand what the key drivers are. We look at things like permits and starts and all the key metrics that impact new construction, but you look at consumer spending, and you look at what people are spending money on these days, putting more money back into their home, or are they spending in other areas like travel, entertainment. But you also have to look at interest rates, interest rate moves, and you just think about the last couple of months, I should say the last year or so, we have seen such a dramatic increase with the Federal Reserve chasing inflation, and we're seeing 30-year mortgage rates going from 3 or 3.5% all the way up to 7%. That has a dramatic impact on our industry. So we've got to follow all the events, including events globally. You talk about whether it's the war in Ukraine or other challenges with the relationships with China and other countries. There are maybe not a core supplier that is located in some of these locations, but oftentimes some of the core materials or raw materials can come out of other parts of the country.
Yeah.
We learned that in the supply chain challenge, that you got to be looking 3 or 4 or 5 steps deeper in your supply chain and know where those risks lie.
When you say, adding all these metrics to, what I'm going to call a dashboard, it's something that, we're a smaller company. We're about 15 people. I do have a CFO, and we talk on a regular basis, and we're constantly talking about our dashboard. And every week it evolves to the point where we want to get so granular with it, where we understand, like, based on the amount of email leads we're getting, we know we're going to be able to do this. With what you just kind of rattled off, all of these things, is this something that you're paying attention to on a personal level, like you're reading through the newspaper and being current with it, or is this something that you're looking at on a way deeper level, where you're looking at this, in a printed out, piece of paper, and you're sitting down with your team and you're saying, man, have you seen interest rates? We need to consider, shifting our focus from the top end product to the middle of the road product. Is that, like, how are you reacting to that stuff?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think my answer would be both. And I think I'd answer both to different roles that different leaders play in the organization. I think we always need to be staying current on reading, because what I'm reading and what somebody who's in our supply chain area might be reading and somebody on the front end of our business might be reading might be slightly different. Sure. A lot of the metrics, though, are tied together, and that's why what you had mentioned, it is so important that you talk about that dashboard, and that dashboard. It's interesting you mentioned it. Today, our senior leadership team met this morning at 7:30. We have a 1-hour call every week, and part of that has to do with just the current market conditions in the overall economy. We tend to come closer together. We meet more frequently. We talk more about these metrics when they're moving. There's a lot more variation in some of these metrics. And so we've decided from moving from every couple weeks or every month to meet every week. And what we have done is exactly what you're saying, is build out a dashboard that starts with some of the key leading indicators. We talk about interest rates, what's changed with interest rates, what's changed with leads in terms of the lead generation that we have in parts of our business, all the way down to what does that mean for revenue, and where do our costs sit? How is our labor balanced with the expectations that we have over the next couple of months, all the way down to what we expect for profitability. And that's something that we constantly have to be looking at to both manage the business, but also manage expectations with our shareholders and other leaders across the organization.
Do you think that you have a much better competitive or business advantage, being that you've been with Andersen for so long and you've been able to reference and experience all of these different economic climates, rather than, I know a lot of people who, and this is with your retention with Andersen, a lot of people who are at one company and they work their way up, they get a title change and they go to another company for whatever reason. But you've been here for so long and you've been able to experience not necessarily ups and downs and recessions, because I know it's been a long time, but what type of competitive or business advantage do you feel that you have, that you are with one company for so long, able to see how this business reacts and acts to the economic climate?
So I think you're absolutely right. Especially as a senior leader or a leader in the organization, having been able to see different cycles, we are in a cyclical industry, which is good and bad, but we've seen different cycles come and go. We're also in a seasonally driven industry, which also helps us understand the variation that happens inside of our business. But I'd say it's nearly invaluable. Some of the lessons that I've been able to learn, I think others that have been able to learn, starting back with the Great Recession in the mid-2000s, and just some of the challenges that we were faced with, and learning new things like you got to run to the fire. You have to run to the fire when you have something as extreme as you lose 70% of the total market in a matter of 2 years. And new construction's down over 70%. So those lessons aren't usually taught, but you can usually get those through going through experiences. And then with the pandemic, completely different. We had seen some of the dislocations that were associated with the housing market back in the Great Recession, but we had never seen anything like COVID. And so that taught us a bunch. And what I would say is that each of these experiences, not only they build wisdom around the industry, but they also help you understand that you can develop strengths through going through challenges like this. And I would tell you that, the thing that I was just speaking to our leadership team the other day, and three things that I think we really took away from the last series of challenges over the last 3 years. The first one is focus and alignment. When things get tough, you got to get focused and aligned, and you got to be able to communicate that effectively with your team. They have to know what we're focused on and what's not as important right now.
When you say focus, you're talking about end product?
Well, it can be end product. It can be the projects that we're doing today, that we're working on today. So we may be working on things to drive the sales numbers, but we also are working on investments in product lines that might not even show up for another 3 or 4 years. So which is important? Do we work on running the business today, or do we manage some of these investments, longer term investments? And I'll answer that in just a second. But the second piece is agility. And I think what we've really taken from some of these dislocations is that we have learned to be a more agile leadership team, a more agile company, more flexible. So when we're dealt with something, the faster you can pivot and the quicker that you can get your team pivoting, I think the better position, you always come out better in the end. And then the third, as I'll answer your question, is balance. And that usually when you go through these times, there's a tendency to swing the pendulum one way or the other. And an organization is looking to say, tell me that I just have to work on the business of today, or are we just working on building this long-term competitive, putting together this long-term competitive strategy? The answer is usually both. And so how do you balance those two, even when you're going through a fire or going through an economic downturn? Oftentimes you have to be much clearer to your organization and the teams, and communicate more often and be much more transparent.
Yeah. It's funny, that's something I struggle with, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about, leadership and how to lead my team better. And it's constantly that pendulum that swings hard in one direction. And where I've failed in previous years is that I would come to the table with a solution rather than, work through with my team to kind of get them to come to the solution. But what I realize is that, I can make a decision. Ultimately, if I'm at the top, I'm going to make the decision, and if it's good or bad, it doesn't matter. I've made the decision. But what happens is the team swings that way and they stay there. And just last week in my operations meeting, we talked about agility.
Mm-hmm.
And I said the issue is that there is no agility there. When we talk about one of the biggest things I think we face is everything is architect driven.
It is.
Every architect works differently, just like our subcontractors. Each plumber is going to have his own thing. Each framer is going to work their own way. And when you're kind of you're working with a particular architect in one way that you really like, and then you switch to another architect and they work a little differently, or they're not delivering the way that you hope. You have to be able to be agile enough to adapt to that. And what I see oftentimes is that there's this like hard stance of, no, this is the way that they need to deliver our drawings and answer our questions. I'm like, I get that. I get that that's ideal, but we have to be agile enough to understand that that's not their strong suit. Maybe they're a fantastic designer. Maybe they can do a fantastic job designing a wonderful home, but their document process is 8 out of 10. Mm-hmm. We have to be okay with that. So when you talk about leadership, obviously your role now as CEO, people is your number one priority, I think. As a CEO, what does leadership mean, beyond what you kind of already outlined?
You did a pretty good job of identifying a couple things that are really important in leadership that I think you implement. I think that you talk about what's the most important. I think the biggest asset to our company is our people. Mm-hmm. And we have 13,000 team members strong, and I always use the term team members because we all go to battle every day. Yeah. And we go home different direction, but we come here all together to kind of drive the business. And that's our team is our biggest asset. Who we're thinking about the most is our customers. Mm-hmm. And you talked a little bit about this idea of being agile, and we have all these audience between us and our homeowners, right? Mm-hmm. You talked about we might have a dealer, and we might have an architect, and we might have a contractor, and we might have a designer, and you got to think about all their needs. And mm-hmm. so agility is really important in kind of being able to account for all the different needs of these audiences along the way to ultimately deliver the right kind of experience for your customer. But getting back to your original question, I think there's a number of things as a leader that's really important. Number one, you've got to be passionate about what you do, and it comes across every day. In my role, people look to me to make sure to get a read on how the business is doing, and if I don't have a passion for what I do, I wake up every morning just being appreciative to be able to do this job and to be able to work with these 13,000 team members. And you got to be passionate, but you also have to be calm. And that's another piece that as a senior leader in the organization, or as a leader you talk about with your crew, they're looking for a sense of calm. Yeah. Even when there is disruptions and there's challenges and fires that you have, you've got to remain calm and very stable. I think the other piece is, and you mentioned it, you've got to be a good listener, because you don't have all the answers. Even though I've been in the industry for 20 plus years, I've got a lot of people that work for me that are a lot smarter than I am in a lot of areas. I like to think I'm a little wiser because I've gone through a lot over the last 20 years. But how do you listen to the perspective and input from your team? That oftentimes will drive you where you need to go. And then I think the last piece is you need to be transparent. You need to be decisive, and transparency is really important. We talked a little bit about this example of when we ran into COVID-19, we didn't know what we were dealing with. Yeah. And all of our team members our worlds were turned upside down, both at home and now at work. And I use this example many times. I remember getting in front of our team, and on a Monday morning and talking to us, this was around just late March when we were just learning about the pandemic, and explained to them, this is how the CDC and other experts are telling us we need to go to work and how we need to do our work. And I remember Wednesday afternoon, we learned that was all out the window, and so to speak, and we had to change the way we operate literally within the same week. And so I got back in front of our team on a Thursday and said, what you heard from me on Monday is now different. But what I tell you builds credibility and trust is transparency. Yeah. And this was something none of us knew anything about. And so keeping the whole team together, pulled together, feeling like we're learning this together, That isn't oftentimes the case where you're dealing with an unknown kind of influence from the outside. But this is one of those moments I think brought us together about as tight as we've ever been as a team.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the transparency at that point, because in your role, people are probably looking up to you for the answers and looking up to you for this authoritative voice, and to stand in front of everyone and be like, hey, what I told you yesterday was wrong, or I don't know the answer right now. It's like, how do you maintain that level of confidence in everyone who's underneath you when you're like, I don't have the answers right now?
You know, that's a really good point. And, you know, one of the things that my predecessor, Jay Lund, as we were going through this as a senior leadership team, really helped to establish the fact that what we did know was we could set some priorities. And our priorities were really fourfold. It was to keep everybody safe, keep everybody in their jobs to the extent that we could, help stop the slow of the pandemic nationwide, and then finally maintain the long-term health of this business. So do the things that we need to do in that order. Start with keeping people safe. And so we came back to that over and over and over for the first couple of years as we went through this. Safety, stopping the spread, being able to keep people in their roles, in their jobs, and that gave people, I think, the comfort and sense of, we know what our purpose is here. Now the environment's going to change all around us, and we'll react and respond to it. But we stayed true to those four principles, and I think that translates even in times when you're not dealing with a pandemic. Setting that vision for your team and being able to communicate that vision very effectively, and that can change over time. Pandemic, the vision, the direction, the mission changed, but making sure you're being very transparent and communicating that's really important.
Are these challenges and everything that you've faced being here, along with that, basically everything that has challenged you being at Andersen and what you faced over the past few years, do you feel that that's responsible for keeping you on board here, and that passion and desire that you said to be successful and take ownership of this company and be a leader? Do you feel that that's what's kept you on board here, aside from financial benefits? And what I'm trying to get to there is retention, employee retention, and maintaining business. There has to be something that keeps you on board and keeps you at Andersen for all of this time to work up internally. And listening to you talk, there's obviously a lot of challenges that face you, and it seems as though your personality, be able to stand up and face those challenges head on alongside of your passion, is something that is retaining you within the organization.
Yeah, it's an interesting piece to reflect on, because I think I've always had a curiosity about the business, and I think that's one of the things that has kept me so interested and engaged. Is that curiosity in all aspects of our business has really been the thing that drives me. But here at Andersen, one of the things that we talk about all the time is continuous improvement, and we kind of tying together a couple of themes that we just talked about is everybody should have a continuous improvement mindset, and that involves the work that you do, the products that we make, everything that we're involved in. Your job shouldn't get overly repetitive if you're constantly looking for ways to continually improve it. And I remember just before we started talking here, we were talking about, is there some aspect of the business and team members that are virtual, and we've had and we do have people that work virtually, and I happened to be speaking to the group about a year ago, and we were talking about how do we get back together, maintain the culture, and connect with one another. And part of what I told the group, and this included everybody who works in our production line all the way to folks that were working virtually, is this is a great opportunity for us. We learned how to use all these new tools, how to be able to work virtually. It was a great opportunity for us. But we also have an opportunity now where we've been apart for a while, and we have an opportunity to come back together and find ways to reconnect. And I challenged the whole group. I said, I remember every of my 30-some years in my career, there was always something that I wish I could have changed about my job. What can I do to just change my role? And I said, let's use this as one of those opportunities to everybody has not only the permission, but the expectation to take one thing about your job and change it. and change that, whether you're working on the line, whether you're in marketing, you're out in sales in front of our teams, but make that change to enrich kind of our connectedness. So maybe it's somebody from the sales team who goes and spends a little bit of time in operations or a manufacturing plant and gets to know the business partners who are supplying the products to him or her. Or maybe it's somebody on the production line who goes out and we get 3 or 4 new people on the line, takes them to lunch and introduces them and makes a connection somewhere on the line. There's so many different ways that we can change and continually improve our roles each and every day. And sometimes you just need the permission or the expectation to just go ahead and do it. And so to answer your question, I constantly look at that this is just ongoing continuous improvement that I think keeps things fresh. And I think the other thing that is really important around keeping people in an organization is you provide them with opportunities and for development and growth. And there's many individuals who get into a role and they say, I love this role, or I love the career path or the function that I'm in. But there's also many others that say, I want to explore a lot of different parts of the organization. It's kind of, I want to understand what that economic engine looks like, or I'm in manufacturing, I want to learn about marketing. Yeah. One of the great things about what we've done here at Andersen is instead of having kind of career ladders we talk about, where if you're in marketing, you only can move up through marketing, I call it more career lattices. So you can move across the organization, be trained and developed, and get better perspective around what drives the business, but also it helps advance your own career. And I think those opportunities around getting developmental opportunities and having a continuous mindset, set up with the right kind of tools to be able to train and develop people is a very effective way of engagement.
That's especially important with what you guys do. And you answered the question I was going to ask, which was, I understand the continuous improvement and the sense of innovation from the R&D end of things and from the leadership side of things, but how is that going to transcend that and trickle down into window production, where you literally have a production line of windows? And it's refreshing to hear the opportunities that you provide to people to move up or just get a different vantage point on a day-to-day basis, that they're not just going through the motions day in and day out. Because I believe if something gets stagnant or you don't offer employees opportunity for growth, that it's going to become mundane and monotonous. And I feel that the product suffers and the overall health of the business suffers at that point. So I guess I don't need to ask you the question because you answered it, but
it only comes through empowerment. I think is empowering people to do it, and that I think a lot of organizations say the right words, but you got to be willing to back it up and know that the experts that you have. I always talk about the surgeons are at the surgeon's table. When we talk about making product, they know how a window or a door comes together. They know what's needed. Our surgeons are also out in the field. They're out working with our customers. They know what a customer's looking for from an experience standpoint. So that's where our experts are.
Oh, sorry, Nick. All of these principles. There was another conversation that I read with you where you were discussing your interview process with your predecessor, and that you had these 2 long interviews, and basically it was about your abilities, but also your values and beliefs. And I'm listening to you talk, and everything that you say, it's not completely innovative. It's not rocket science. These are values and moral principles that it's straightforward, but how are you taking them and implementing them into your business or your daily operations to get to where you have today? Because I'm listening to you talking, I'm like, these are all the same things that we talk about, but like, why isn't everyone at this level? So what do you think is the differentiator there between just having these values and principles and being able to execute?
And this is something that organizations cannot do overnight. They can't do it in a year. It comes through their culture, and it comes through embedding your fundamental values in every decision you make. And if your value system is like what you read, it came through the interviewing process. And so when I was interviewing with, at that time, the chief financial officer, he was really looking for the right kind of fit, my value system, my background, so that whatever decision I ended up making, it was going to be based along the lines of our corporate principles or our corporate values. And I think if you embed that in to the decisions you make, you come back to it. What's most important as we think about our operations? What's most important? Safety first. So we care about our people and our people's safety first and foremost. That there's no exception. You can do whatever you need to do to stop a line, to make sure somebody is safe. You don't break from those principles. And I think when companies break from those principles and the decisions they make, people see it in the organization and then judge whether that's truly what your values are. And we've got a number of, I think, really important, long-standing values that have been here for decades before I've gotten here. Values like excellence and integrity. And integrity is all about doing the right thing every time. It may not be, we talk about warranties, and it's stepping up and making sure you're doing the right thing no matter what you say. Innovation is a critical one. It's embracing change. How do we embrace change and not grow complacent as the market leader and as a leader in our industry? That oftentimes happens. We talk about giving back to our communities. If we walk the walk across our senior leadership team and our leaders and our team members, people will follow and recognize that it's important to give back to our communities with our time and our talents. And so we tend to, I think when it's embedded in the fabric of your culture, it's easier to maintain, but it's really, really hard to do if it's just lip service.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about the smaller companies,
Mm-hmm.
A lot of guys listening to this are working for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
In relation to kind of what you're talking about, and speaking from the top, having a good leadership team, that might be one guy in
Mm-hmm.
in a company.
Yep.
And they hear you talk about culture, and for them and listening to this, it very much is just words that you're saying. And I mean that respectfully, right? In the sense that they're listening, yeah, that's great. They have a culture. I'm one guy. I have a truck. I'm building houses, and I got 3 guys that work for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think the difficult thing for those 3 guys, and we spoke about this off mic,
Mm-hmm.
but that there's a good chance that at least one of them wants the opportunity to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you speak to, your position in growing from, when you started here at Andersen to eventually a CEO, and how you can relate that to someone that is in a smaller firm and what they need to be thinking about when they're bringing something to the table that is deserving of that growth?
Yeah. Well, I think, I mentioned a couple of things. One is the curiosity piece. You're going to want a curiosity. You're going to want to express that openly. Now, I also think what's important is finding the right kind of mentors. And, I think about the success I've had, and I see the success others have. If you're in a small crew, find the person who does that job or that role really well.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? If that person's your boss and doesn't do it very well, maybe you talk to somebody else that
Sure.
might be from another crew, or somebody's who really leads with authenticity and leads out front. And I think that's as important, as to try to find those mentors, people that can help you along the way.
Let me pause you there for just a minute. What is a mentor like? I think people think of mentors as business coaches. I pay them. It's the reality is it's not. It's what just to kind of peel back what you said. It's finding the person that's doing what you want to do. But what in that position when you looked towards a mentor of your own, what was that conversation? What was that? What role did they play in your career?
Well, oftentimes, I think the misconception is it might be your boss or something. It's generally not the person you're working for, because you oftentimes, from a mentoring standpoint, you want to have a very open dialogue about what's going on inside your current role. And so it depends on what area you're looking to grow in. And so I use maybe my example. There was a period in my career that I was really trying to focus on somebody who was a really good listener. And I happened to be, during that time, I was jumping in on a lot, trying to answer a lot of questions, trying to present myself in a way that felt like I
bring
knew,
your value,
bring my value forward. And I realized through some coaching that, you know what, you got to listen a little bit more. And sometimes jumping to the conclusion right away doesn't help your team learn as well. And so what I did was I observed and I watched in meetings, and I found a couple people who were really good at listening. And then they'd pause, they'd get input from people, and they made a decision, and they were resolute about it, and they made the decision. But you could tell there was input from, in many cases, just by listening to people, even if their recommendation wasn't included, they felt appreciated. And so, that was something that I was just observing and looking for somebody that has a quality that I'm trying to work on, and watch what they do. Sometimes it doesn't even have to be on the job site, right? It could be your spouse. It could be, those are the kind of things that you look for, those individuals around you that you respect, and sometimes you have to be vulnerable and ask them, what is it that you do differently to show up differently?
But I think what you just said is sometimes you're not even talking to them. That mentor is strictly someone that you're observing. Right. That is something that I have certainly learned and realized is that, it's so short-sighted to come to the table with the answer. It's also very ego-driven. For me, it was, I knew everything. I got the answer to that, and whether or not it was the right answer, it didn't matter. I was bringing a solution to the table, and and I would always kind of drill into my team. It's like, listen, obviously the best decision is the right one, but the second best is the wrong one. No decision, that's the worst thing we can do, is just be stagnant. And it was when I really, like you said, started stopping and listening, and realizing that if I just shut up for a minute, my team will eventually get to probably the same decision that I would have made. And it's way more long-term thinking. For me, I could have brought that answer. Yeah, I could have answered it in 2 minutes instead of 12, and we could have moved on with our day. But then my team doesn't. I'm now the handicap.
That's right. So
when I'm not at that meeting or involved in a conversation, the team becomes stagnant,
well,
and then they make no decision.
You're absolutely right. It's unfortunate. When we go through progressions in our careers, whatever line of work you're in, we reward so many people about their own, at least early on, their own individual contributions. And what is it that you have delivered lately, right? It's your individual contributions. And then if somebody has an interest in going and coaching or supervising others, you've had this mindset that you've now been ingrained into you for 10 or 15 or 20 years it's about my work. Well, you can't lead other people effectively if it's just about your work. Yeah. To your point, you'll overshadow them. You won't give them the time to bring their voice forward, and they'll never learn.
Right.
And so they'll eventually default to you, and they will never learn through the process. So I always call it kind of that jog in the pipeline when you're going through. It's a lot of times early on, it's about you early on in your career, and oftentimes it's way more about the others around you and how can you step back and bring them along. And to your point, might be a little bit slower pace. But you'll probably get to the answer. And if they don't get to the right answer, that's a coaching opportunity for you, right?
Yeah. And we had this conversation internally, and my team's like, well, what if we make the wrong decision? I'm like, what if? And they're like, well, then, I'm like, the reality of making the wrong decision is 50-50, right? The reality of the wrong decision being so bad that we couldn't accept it or fix it is swaying in our direction. So you have a pretty good shot of being okay with whatever decision that you make. And if it's ultimately the worst decision that you made, like exactly, it's a coaching opportunity. It's like, all right, why was that the decision that you made? Let's peel that back and understand it. And then they have this opportunity to be like, yeah, that makes sense. Now I understand how to move forward. Well,
and I was looking at the best learnings come from sometimes the biggest mistakes, right? And I think we sometimes get short-sighted of that, and just focus on the mistake versus focusing on the learning opportunity. The biggest challenges we've ever faced, that I've faced here in my career at Andersen and in the housing market, has been through some of the toughest times we've gone through. We've come out the back end though, as a leadership team, as a broader team, stronger than we've ever been. And if you allow for that, to make a mistake, adjust, make a mistake, course correct. We will all come out of this stronger.
And I think, sorry, one more point. I think that, what happens is, especially early in growth, is that, when you start hiring people, like early on, you don't want them to make those same mistakes, and you get frustrated. It's like, I've already made that mistake. Don't make that mistake. But the reality is, it's like, you have to accept the fact that as you grow, you're going to repeat mistakes.
Sure.
Ultimately, your goal is to reduce the amount of times it's repeated, but when you bring new people in, it's inevitable. And that was something, you know, again, speaking personally, I struggle with it a lot. It's like, no, I've already made that mistake. How could you have done that? Instead of realizing it's like, hey, I completely understand why you made that mistake. I made the same one a year ago.
How much do you feel that a lack of confidence or experience hampers the decision-making process? And what I mean by that is, there are a lot of decisions that you have to make in a day, and you don't always know the answer to them. Like you said earlier, be resolute in your decision-making. Do you feel that having the confidence and the experience that if you make the wrong decision, you still have the ability to make it right, plays a big role in the people who are having the difficulties making decisions in the first place?
Yeah, I think it depends on the magnitude of the decision, right? And you know, we have this all the time. I think people they're listening in have the same thing happen, where there's oftentimes we make a decision, but we didn't have enough information in front, and that's kind of our fault, because you want to try to gather as much information as you can. But then there's those or times that we get paralyzed because we're 90% of the way there, but we want to close that extra 10% gap, and we feel like we just can't move forward without getting more information. I think people are wired different ways too, and some people feel like, I need to get 100% of the information to get there. Others want to move quickly and rely on their gut. And I think it's trying to bring the team together and really understand that it's in between. And if you go and you try to gather the right kind of inputs that you need, and you get 75-80% of the way there, and you rely the rest on your knowledge and your wisdom, and that you're fine. And oftentimes it's coaching people's tendencies on both ends to make sure you're bringing people along to drive a little bit more analytically driven decisions on one end, but trying to back some of those folks off of that have been stuck on trying to make a decision for weeks when we should have made it in a matter of hours.
Well, it's like, how many resources do you want to throw at obtaining that last 10%, where you could just give this a go and put those resources towards making this successful?
That's right. And I think it's also knowing what are the implications if you get it wrong. And as a team, that's part of what you have to understand. Whether you're leading a crew, whether you're a contractor, or whether you're leading a business of our size, you have to know, when I make this decision, what are the implications? Can I undo it? Can I rewind it? Can I step back? Or are the implications pretty significant? And I think you have to weigh that into every decision that you make. Not get paralyzed by it, but it has to be part of the input.
With regard to leadership, I think that a lot of people are born natural leaders, and a lot of people evolve into becoming leaders just based on experience and their upbringing. Do you feel that you've always been a leader from the time you were a young man on, or is this something that you've developed? And you don't come off as like this big, strong leader who walks in and everyone like turns the other way, and he's leading and we're fearful of our leader. The way that you lead, and I could tell by the way people act and react around you, it's definitely a different approach than a lot of people take. Is this a role that you feel you've evolved into, or were you the captain of the sports team growing up?
Well, thanks for noticing, by the way. I try not to be that leader, but it's you probably hit on probably the foundations of my leadership development. But I go all the way back to, I was born into a family with 4 kids. I was the first. And so I was asked to do a lot, and you're asked to do a lot with your siblings, and so I think there was some natural leadership tendencies that came into place early on, but that's not what formed, I think, my perspective and my approach to leadership. It was probably through athletics, and that was I was I call it a gym rat. I love basketball, and so I would be in the gym all day long playing basketball, love track, and so constantly working both in individual sports but team-based sports. And I think that was, even though I was I was the captain of the team, I would say that the leadership aspects that I learned through athletics came less about my role as the captain in different positions, but more about what you learn about teamwork and what's important in building strong teams, right? We talked about you got to be able to listen. You got to play it, even as the captain sometimes, you have to play a team role. Like there may be other people that are stronger, that you're going up against. You may not be the great 3-point shooter, but you got a couple good 3-point shooters, and so you say it's their role this time around to step up and take that leadership role. And I learned a lot about playing roles, different roles that you play, listening to others, respecting others' opinions was another one that's, I think, really important. And I tell you, one of the biggest lessons I learned, and we talked just a little bit about this, about how you bring a team in and you build them around you, your crew maybe, is to value diversity.
Yeah.
And value people that have different experiences, perspectives, backgrounds. Could be it's a different culture, a different gender, but there's many different ways to think about diversity. And I think one of the best things that good leaders do is that they surround them with people that aren't exactly like them. One of the biggest pitfalls is if you go and hire or you work with people that are going to fall right in line with exactly what you do every day. You want people that have brought different experiences and perspectives. They're the ones that share with the risk, right? What are the risks that go into this? I'm going to give a perspective from the customer's lens instead of manufacturing, because you have more manufacturing background. And so I think that's when I think about my development in this space. It's when I started to unlock this idea of everybody's got different talents to bring. And the more that I surround myself with people that are different than me or have had different backgrounds, we'll end up in a much better place.
Did you realize, so all these lessons, you look back on your youth growing up as the oldest child and your sports career, these lessons that you're now taking with you to this point in your life, did you realize that they were being learned as they were happening, or is this the type of thing where you look back in hindsight, you realize, wow, this worked because of this and this failed because of that?
Mm-hmm. A little bit of both. When I was young and I didn't really know better. No, I was not.
I look back on when I was a kid and I was just like, I screwed up. I screwed up again.
I can't tell you how many times I just wanted the ball. Yeah. I don't want to share it. There's been so many mistakes and challenges that I've gone through, just different mistakes that I've learned from over time, that you eventually evolve to a place. And as you get older, you just get more comfortable, kind of in your own skin in terms of what works and what doesn't. And one of the things that I always think about is I tell a lot of people, don't sweat the small stuff. Sometimes when I was going through a lot of growing and developing, it's like I always get too worried about the little things that and got hung up on the wrong things. But I think about oftentimes we go through these personality tests like Myers-Briggs or DISC, where they try to tell you what type of personality you are, and do you fit into a category where an introvert or an extrovert? Are you this or that? And they try to put you into buckets. I remember I was always either the kid or even in my career when I take these tests, I was kind of right in the middle, and I always felt like, geez, I don't feel comfortable enough going to any of these one areas and having that as my natural tendency, until I finally figured out, what I have is I go to a lot of these different places, but in my career, you kind of force yourself. If you're with a group of introverts, you now want to maybe come out as the extrovert and start to pull more out of the introverts. Vice versa, if you get a whole bunch of extroverts, you may step back and let the extroverts kind of take the room. And so I think this idea of having balance and being able to shift kind of back and forth around who you are, but always staying true to your values, but showing up differently in different situations from a leadership standpoint, I think can be very powerful. And I used to worry about that. I used to think, I don't have a strong enough tendency around, there's feeling and analytical and all these. And I tend to land right in the middle, and it's
funny. I'm the complete opposite. I sway to one side.
Yeah.
And when I read through it, it's comical because all the things they say I'm bad at, I'm terrible at. And, it actually helped, like we did it internally as well. And it helped with my operations guy, where it's, we're reading it. Look, he's essentially the exact opposite of me. And I'm like, all right, I've been trying to do all these things. That's your role.
Yeah.
Like, you're way better at that. Let me do this. And it's created clarity. And regardless of whether or not you take a test, I think that the point here is that you need to understand who you are and the value that you bring to the table.
That's right. We actually, when we've done these exercises, we actually post them. So you post them on your whether it's your desk or somewhere at work, and so people know what your tendencies are.
That's fun.
And if we all learn about the tendencies, we know how to maximize. Even though we may lean way into one direction. Well, how do you maximize that instead of as a negative or development area? How do you maximize that as a strength? And then how do you look to others that you may not be as close to? How can I bring myself closer to kind of understanding their perspective or leveraging or using that perspective differently?
I feel like if I posted my personality on my office, people are like,
post it on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm definitely not going to share this piece of information with Nick. He's just going to go off into the abyss with it.
Mm-hmm. So if you're doing this moral inventory, right, and you find your list of strengths and your list of weaknesses, do you feel one is more important to spend more time on, or you have the mindset where it's like, hey, I need to play my strengths or I need to work on my weaknesses?
That's always a big challenge, right? And I think that sometimes it depends on the role you're in, the role that you're playing. And if you haven't, and I call them developmental areas, if you have an area that you need to kind of develop on or focus on, is that really important in the people that you're interacting with and the role that you're in? You could even say, is it important in the relationships you have at home? These are things that, you want to spend more time on that. But if it's something that maybe spending time on your strengths is helping you in terms of where you're at from a career standpoint, that balance is just fine. But I always think there's a lot of flat spots that we all have, and they sometimes change over time. A lot of times they're very similar because they're very true to who we are, but sometimes they come out in the experiences and the situations we're put into. And so I've had flat spots that have shown up, midway through my career that you find out about, and because it's a new experience or new challenge, and you're like, okay, well, that's one that I have to kind of focus on if I want to continue on the path that I'm on.
Do you think that you are finding out about these things through self-reflection or through meeting with somebody who's different or has a different perspective on life or business that's shedding light on this to you?
Well, that's some of it comes from, you give people trust, and you're open and you're talking with people. They'll sometimes tell you. They'll tell you hey, you need to work on this.
You suck at this.
Yeah. But sometimes that transparency is really good if they're really good at observing what you need to work on. There's other times that you get coaching from others that are around you, but I've always found the more openness, the more transparent you can be, generally the better we'll all be. Because then, if you have a tendency that you don't see, and self-reflection is a big, that's one of the things that talk about. There's moments that I've worked on things. Self-reflection is one of those moments. It's you think you're operating a certain way, yet you're not coming across that way. And so how do you get more self-reflection? And some of that is building trust with some people that you trust to say, give me some feedback in certain areas. And oftentimes that's the best way to get it. But you got to build a lot of trust first to be able to not take that as a criticism, but take it as a way that you're helping to develop yourself.
I mean, that's not that much different than what you do in business as well when you wrap up a job to find out, what was your customer experience like? And exactly. I think for the overall wellness of a business, it's no different than the situation that you just spoke of, where it would have to be the right customer to come to you and be like, your site protection sucked. Like, your electrician was terrible. It was good, it was fine. But to build up that rapport or have that relationship or give somebody the autonomy to be able to express with sincerity how they felt about that experience, it's going to be telling of what your business looks like.
Well, it's an interesting point when you start to translate it into the business, because it's really the cornerstone for a big part of our business, the Renewal by Andersen business, and now other parts of our business as well, which is it's all about collecting information around the customer experience. And you collect it at different touch points. You do it after you've sold the job. You do it after you've gone in and done a technical measure, and you do it kind of post installation. and at many points they might have many different experiences with you, and getting all the information in, and we put it into we use Net Promoter Score, which kind of measures the satisfaction, where you can use the tops, 9s and 10s, but all the stuff at the bottom are detractors, and anything in the middle up through a 7 or 8 gets thrown out. You don't even get credit for that. So you have to be operating on that high end, and that's how you get to the 9s and 10s, is from the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. Because generally it's not a 1, 2, 3, or 4 on everything you did, but it might have been, you know what, you did a 9 or you did a 10, but you left that cigarette butt in my driveway.
Yep.
And I just didn't think that was very respectful. And we get that those kind of things sometimes happen. And so, you know, you're always, I've always said that you're always kind of being interviewed. You're always on the job interview, especially when you're in somebody's home and you're doing something to the thing they may prize the most, right? It's their prized possession is their home. And so I think it's important.
The cigarette example, that happens. You guys review it, your score's down on that particular job. What's the course of events after that? Yeah.
So part of it is to try to share best practices, because we have a very clear set of standards of how we should operate and how we should show up. And you know, so much of what we talk about across the entire business, everything from whether you're in somebody's home and you're probably creating as much damage and destruction as they'll ever see inside their home, right? Tearing out windows and doors and putting in new windows, doors, doing additions, or whether you're making the product in the plant and you have a part of making that product. We always say, treat it as if it's your home or your mother's home, or your workspace is somewhere that you would want your daughter or your son to work. Right? And is it a safe environment? Is it something that it promotes what you do?
Yeah.
And so I think if you personalize these things, that is probably the best way to get people to think about how would I want to be treated? And it's pretty easy then to follow up with best practice. There might be things we're not doing all that well. We share that across the organization, but it comes back down to this personalization. And we didn't talk about this, but we changed our entire mission statement a little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago. We used to have a mission statement that read, to be the leading window and door company in terms of innovation, sustainability, quality, and we went through all these things. And then at the last part said, in the eyes of our customers. And we stepped back from that and we thought about, you know what? Why do we have the customer at the end of the statement? Why don't we completely change our entire mission and make it exclusively about the customer? And so our mission that we now have is to become a world-class customer experience company that happens to make windows and doors. And that mindset and that shift is really important, to put the customer first and have an outside-in perspective. And we've really been kind of shifting our mindset toward the customer because of that mission statement and because of what we're trying to do in that space.
And forgive me, I'm going to ask the question again,
No,
but add to it. So I ask about the cigarette example because this guy that, is a renewal guy, he goes on the site, everything's great, but he leaves a cigarette in the driveway. And to him, not a big deal. To many people in the world, not a big deal. You're just being ridiculous. He probably left it there by accident. But what is there a course of events that information does get back to that guy?
Oh, yeah.
And we don't have to go down like super technical. And the reason I'm asking is, like Tyler said, like at the end of the job, I do a survey, and not even a survey. I schedule time and I sit down and I ask questions, and and I'm very deliberate with my questions, and I try to, even in a very neutral zone, like, hey, what didn't you like? I'm not going to say that. I'm going to figure out like, hey, what were some of the things that you think we should keep doing as a business? Maybe things that we shouldn't do. And I've had, clients say, you know what? Everyone was really great, but this particular trade, they weren't super nice when they were on site, and I just didn't feel comfortable with them. And I took that, and my team knows, but I've always thought, like, do I bring that back to the guy that was the issue?
Yeah, I'd say absolutely, because you can only change behavior through providing that kind of feedback directly to where it started. And I think we've tried to set up a process where, if you're an installer, if you're thinking about the renewal side of the business now, installer, if you're design consultant, selling on the sales side, you should have your numbers, and you should be measured by your numbers. And part of measuring is around the customer satisfaction.
Sure.
And whether you sold that job or you didn't, and that person said no, we also get feedback on the homeowners that say no, it's not right for me either right now or in the future. And we also like to engage with a survey for those individuals, because that's when you're probably, you're not going to get that sale. You got to be at your best when it could be a time when you're not happy. And so getting that information back to our team members is critically important for them to continue to elevate. Again, think about it for a design consultant, somebody who's selling in the home. They'd probably want to know what were some of the things that didn't work in whatever their presentation was or the interaction that they had. And so if they can use it to benefit and get better, then it's worth it. Yeah,
it's interesting. We were going down the road of a new project recently, great renovation project, and very promising in all aspects. And we got an email one Friday afternoon, and the client was like, "Hey, just so you know, we're going to go a different route." And obviously not great news, but I replied, I said, "Understood. Would you be willing to hop on a call? I'd love to understand why." And she was like, "Sure." We hopped on a call, 10 minutes, and she outlined, after putting our proposal together, that she just, there were certain things that in the way we, would manage the project that she didn't value. And that was it. Yep. And, ultimately I'm not there to change her mind. It was, okay, this is how we manage it. Our values aren't aligned. It makes sense. I'm glad that you brought that to my attention. And now I can share that with the team as to, hey, here was an opportunity that we didn't get, and these are the reasons why. And, until we just kind of outlined this or said this out loud, I never really thought about the value that would bring to our trade partners and, our vendors, where it's, they need that feedback. Because otherwise what would happen, right, is that I would just never hire that trade again.
That's right.
And here this trade goes, why? We used to do all their work. What happened? I'm so confused. And, and maybe at some point I said, yeah, well, it's because you left a cigarette in the driveway 10 years ago. Yeah.
Well, it goes back to, Tyler, this idea of continuous improvement, right? Yeah. I think if you have team members that are engaged and they're looking to continually try to get better, that feedback is really important, whether it's hard to hear or whether it's something that's, and the other side of it is, making sure, we haven't talked a lot about this, but making sure we're talking about the 9s and 10s with our teams and what went right? Because you gotta, every time, the combination between giving somebody critical feedback and positive has got to be 5 to 1. 5 good things and then 1 thing that you got to work on, right? Yeah. Because it's amazing the impact that one comment that somebody might take as very personal, what might do to how they feel about themselves. And so making sure they understand what are the things that they're doing right as much as what are the things they got to keep.
Is that a standard 5 to 1?
I've heard different, everything for 3 to 1, 5 to 1. I do a lot. Try to do a lot of positives to every developmental opportunity. The second you lead with, what you did wrong, it never opens up somebody's mind to why you're doing it.
Sure.
Building the appreciation for why. Yeah. So you've done all these great things, and you've got, talk about being in the home, and you got some great feedback from the homeowner. You brought dog treats for the dog. You knew there was going to be a dog there, and there's just all these kind of unique things you can layer in and then say. But the one thing that left a little bit of an impression was this. And so I just think, and sometimes it's not leading with 5 to 1. It's maybe doing 2 and talking about the one they got to focus on, then finishing on 2 or 3 positives. Really will leave people in the right place.
And I think that there is a delicate balance there where you are not patronizing somebody to be able to drop that hammer on them. Where I have the customer email where we love this, and this, and it's all right, here it's coming.
The shit's
coming. Yeah. Or there's a balance there.
That's right. And by the way, there are the times when somebody drops a cigarette in the carpet and it burns part of the carpet. They try to cover it up, and that is a different discussion, right? Yeah. So making sure we know when we have to provide really hard.
It's that cigarette that you try to cover up.
That's right.
So with regard to that, renewal is going to present its own unique set of challenges versus Andersen. And I think of it, Nick, where it's like, are you going to have a cabinet company where you're building everything in-house in a control environment versus then going and working on somebody's home? Do you find that there are just different challenges between producing windows in a controlled environment and not being on a customer's home, and then the renewal side where now you're dealing with every single project has a different customer that you're now in, like you said, their biggest investment?
We have kind of a couple different channels. The renewal by Andersen goes directly to that homeowner. We control end to end, from the material that goes into the product to the fabrication of the product, to assembling the product, delivering the product, and then we work on the sale, we work on the install or the measure process, the install, and cleaning everything else. So end to end, we control that whole experience. As much as we have different homeowners in that environment that might have some different expectations, they're getting different windows, they're getting different, controlling that whole process makes it easier.
Yeah.
Because we can measure along the way. I know when, let's say we had a glass skip or something, a piece of glass broke in the plant, and we know, it's going to be an extra 2 days for the homeowner. I can reach out to the homeowner right away. Could we reschedule now, which is might be out, 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Can we schedule now instead of kind of reschedule the day before we're supposed to come? We know in our process what's happening. In the Andersen side of the business, where we have a series of dealers and we're working with all these audiences between us and I call them partners, because they truly are partners between us and the end homeowner. There's a lot of signals that go back and forth in different directions, and even in that channel, there's a lot of different products that are sold, different expectations. You might be selling into a multifamily project, which is a lot different than selling into somebody's individual home. And so I think the big challenge is trying to understand all these audiences and partners' needs, like we talked about before, is probably even more challenging when you don't control it all. And it doesn't mean we have to have complete control, but we have to have complete alignment around what are our objectives for each of these partners, and how can we meet their expectations. We treat each of them as a customer. So along the way, whether it's that designer, whether it's the architect, whether it's whether it's a home builder, dealer, every one of those are a customer that might need a little bit something different.
Yeah. So as far as Andersen goes as well, the putting the customer first and having this almost as if you're looking for a boutique feel, a white glove customer experience, putting the customer first. It's a family company. It's a 120-year-old company. What are you doing to maintain that family company feel when you are a company the size that you are and the scale that you are? Because I think that's why a lot of small companies are successful, because you can call up and you can get, hey, is Mr. Andersen there? Let's talk to him. Where you're a company of your scale, how do you maintain that level of connection and with all of these different, those touch points, like you said, being the size of company that you are?
Yep. Well, and there's different levels, right? It's we're incredibly blessed to be a part of a 120-year-old company, and I think some of the same foundational elements that either came about in the early 1900s, the mid 1900s, we oftentimes carry those on as our foundation. So a good example is being different and better. We say, in anything we do, how can we be different and better? And even though we're a much larger company, we're the market leader in our space now, and much larger than we've ever been, how can we provide different and better solutions to each of our customers? And that comes with listening to the customer's needs and asking the customer what they're looking for, but also having face-to-face contact with the customer and making sure we're creating that. Internally, when I think about our teams, it's about, I use the term altogether. Altogether was a term that was used by Hans Andersen back in the early 1900s when he was out on the St. Croix River here breaking up log jams, and him and his boys used to use the term all together, boys. Well, we dropped the boys part because all together is a much more gender neutral comment, but all together is kind of how we treat everything we approach inside the organization to feel like we're coming to, I'd say battle, but we come to work every day with a common objective, but we embrace all of our differences, the diversity and the differences that we have. And I think it's important that, just like Hans Andersen did 120 years ago, everybody from me on down, you got to lead from out front. And so I've got to be out on the shop floor, talking to people, engaging. It's part of what I really enjoy doing. It's one of my favorite things to do. I've got to get out and talk to customers, engage with customers. If I get a customer complaint oftentimes sent to me, I definitely follow up on it, and I try to respond as best I can. And so some of those touch points, we sometimes call being a difference maker, looking for opportunities to make connections to customers and in a way that they might not expect it is, I think, a big way, and empowering your team to do that is important.
How many hours do you have in a day to be able to, it seems, talking to you, and every question that we ask with respect to this business, and I mean, right, Andersen is a business, but there's so many different businesses underneath of that. And to have a grasp and your finger on the pulse of everything that's going on underneath of you, it seems as 8-10 hours per workday wouldn't quite be enough.
It doesn't. No, there's no 8 to 10 hour work days in this role, but I'd say that's in a lot of roles. And in this role, you got to be on all day, every night, throughout the weekends. Things happen across a business this size with 25 locations. We got another 100 retail locations around the country, and so things do happen. But this gets back to what we talked about, empowering your team. You set the right kind of guideposts for what's expected and what we need to do, and then I shouldn't have to make every decision in the company.
Yeah.
But when it comes to something where, like you're talking about, if we fell down on something, I want to make sure we take personal accountability for when that happens, and we're reaching out in the right way and making sure the customer knows. And I tell you, some of the best glowing referrals that we've had is when it started when we made a mistake, and we acknowledge the mistake, we come back and we make it right. And oftentimes a number of those customers end up being our biggest advocates, telling all their friends and family, what happened. They love the windows, they love the doors, but the experience was made right when sometimes.
So I like to walk into every job and start it by putting a hole in a water line, and it's up from there. But yeah, I mean, the job can't, standard. Right? The job can't be too stressful. You look good for 25, It's cool to walk around the campus and see even the first building that we were in that they had just remodeled, and seeing the old Andersen logo and seeing that brand heritage of a 120-year-old company. And seeing you guys be able to balance the new and the old. We were in the test center today and looking through all of the engineering that goes into developing your systems, and it's really neat to see the blend between the two, where it's like you have this really old company, but then in a building a couple of blocks away, you're really pushing the bounds of engineering and testing of these windows.
Absolutely.
It's really neat to see, and we've been around and toured other window companies, and I was like, this is super cool how clean and how up to date and new the technology is here, but then also carrying on that tradition, which I would assume is a really big important part of all of this with the family. That's
a great observation, and it comes back to balance. You got to strike that balance, and that automation, robotics, really trying to, we call it disrupting ourselves. How do we disrupt ourselves so we can disrupt the industry in a way that's positive for our customers and our homeowners? And you got to do that with technology, but you also do that with a balance of your team members. And it can't just come through technology. It can't just come through robotics. It's got to be a combination of the two. And integrating our teams into technology as they're able to kind of manage and handle technology, and the growth that we have in that space is, been, I think, one of the things that we've done well.
So, looking at your career with Andersen, obviously you've been fairly successful here. You've been here for a long time. You've worked your way up. How do you personally gauge your own success within the business? Because I mean, you could look at it on paper and it's like, yeah, by all metrics I've been successful here, but what are you gauging your success by that's making you wake up on every day and continually better yourself?
Yeah, so I try to, first of all, you're never going to be able to please everybody when you have 13,000 team members and way more customers than that. So it's not by making sure everybody is completely happy. But I would tell you that I look at success and I start with our customers and the measure of our customers' feedback to us and continuing to maintain very high scores is really important to me. Then I take that same measure and I look at our team engagement, and we're actually in the process right now. We do it twice a year. It's a voice of employee, and we do a voice of employee measure where we send it out to everybody in the organization, and they send back, and it's a series of a number of questions around their level of engagement, what's going right, what isn't going right, and we get all that back, and that's a measure that I look at to say, are we creating the right kind of work environment for our teams, and what do we need to do? In some respects, there might be parts of the organization that we have to make some improvements on, but I look at it as a whole. Are we providing the right kind of again, tools, processes? I say the right environment. I always use the term because the previous CEO shared this perspective, and I truly believe in it. Diversity is a fact. There is so much diversity around us, and that's a really good thing. Inclusion is an option, and so making sure we are creating an inclusive environment for all of our team members to be able to reach their full potential is one of those measures for me that I look for in making sure that I say I'm being successful, but I say me as an extension of our entire leadership team. I am an extension of our team, and I really view my role as I'm here to serve. I've been fortunate enough to be able to step into this role and being the 11th CEO and president, 10 coming before me, of which I stand on the shoulders of giants that have come before me, but I also look at my 13,000 team members, and I'm here to serve them in terms of making sure that I'm here and providing what they need to make our customers happy.
What do you feel is the biggest thing that differentiates you guys from the other main players in this industry? And it's not just product, right? But at the end of the day, it's like, why is somebody going to put Andersen Windows in their house? And obviously there's the mechanical, physical end of that, where it's like we go through these rigorous tests and everything else, but there's got to be more to it than just choosing Andersen for the window itself. Yeah,
I think, historically we've been known for our products and the quality of our products, how we stand behind our products, the energy efficiency around our products. And I think that all kind of gets captured together in kind of a holistic, being able to provide the best products, but also to do it in a way that creates the right kind of experience. And we're really looking to continue to transform not only the products that we make, but the experience that a customer gets with us. Anytime you're in their home, disrupting their home, it tends to be it could be a several day to a several month kind of project. How they're treated, the tools that they get to be able to do some shopping. I even think about, how we shop for a lot of things today are electronically go online, and if I want a new rug, I can see that rug placed in my house by taking a picture, and artificial intelligence shows me how that would fit in my room. We're doing the same thing with windows and doors. So how do you bring that experience to customers, and ultimately give them a peace of mind that what we're going to be able to bring is experience, but a set of products that can last you your lifetime and should last you your lifetime.
I don't think that people realize how important it is for you to be able to trust who's working in your home, but also what you're putting in your home. Mm-hmm. I know as a small contractor, a lot of times I get hired because of the trust that people have in me or we're instilling in them. And I think that putting a product to market that people can trust and that there's a name that's going to back them if there's an issue in a warranty is incredibly important in today's
I would agree.
I
think it's becoming even more important, and people becoming keenly aware of the crap that might be out there. Even from a health perspective, quality of materials is becoming more and more of a relevant conversation. And obviously with building envelopes and tighter homes, all of these things play a huge role in the performance of the home, even for what oftentimes is a short lifespan for a family. They don't spend a tremendous amount of time in a home, for the life of that home, meaning that it gets sold. But these questions are coming up a lot more. So trust and transparency.
It's interesting you both say, trust. Just 2 weeks ago, we were named by Newsweek as one of the most trustworthy companies in America, and for 2023. And the reason I really appreciate, we've got a number of accolades for best employer by Forbes, for women, for LGBTQ community, for best employer in America. So we've had a lot of accolades. One of the reasons I like the most trustworthy, and having received that recognition, is that what they do is they go out and they survey 25,000 Americans, just general Americans. They say, what are the brands and the companies that you feel are the most trustworthy or trusted from an employee standpoint, that their employees can trust them and that their customers can trust them, and it would be a company you'd want to invest in. And so we made that list this year, which was, I think, a great testament to
that's huge.
Being trusted.
Is there anything that you would like to discuss, touch on, that we should have asked you that we did not ask you, that you feel is relevant or important to today's conversation?
I appreciate, Nick and Tyler, just what the two of you are doing in this podcast, and I haven't been a follower of the podcast. I'm going to be here now in the future, but I actually appreciate the fact that you're bringing some of the daily challenges to our trade, to the folks in the trade. Customers listen. You've got a pretty broad audience, a broad cross section of the audience, and I think oftentimes we talk about where do you find best practices, or where do you talk to somebody about who's sharing some of the same problems or challenges that you are. You guys are able to do that through this podcast, so I give you a lot of credit, and maybe that's probably a good place to end. And that the kind of messages that you bring forward, they're certainly enjoyed, but they're also really valued when you think about development and training and feedback and other things, sharing best practices. So what you're doing here is having a big impact. So thank you.
We appreciate it. We appreciate you having us, for partnering with us. It's been huge for us. We're excited to be out here. We saw, I guess it's the Garofalo Center today, but I'm excited to see the rest of your operation. We flew in early today, and that's all we've seen so far, but I'm very impressed, and I'm actually excited to see the rest of this.
We can't wait to get you out there.
We appreciate it.
I got one last question.
All right.
Yeah.
So you skipped over not skipped over, but you said that this is not an 8 to 10 hour a day job, and it's kind of all encompassing.
Nick's just trying to justify his work schedule to his wife right now.
Yeah, I need a quote from you. No, I'm just kidding. Quickly, what is your schedule as CEO of Andersen?
It varies every week. So generally I'm traveling once a week or once every other week, either out to visit customers, visit our plants, it could be suppliers. And so I tend to be on the road at least once a week or once every 2 weeks for a couple of days. And the rest is spread out across a number of different, whether it's meetings, it's working with our whether it's our ownership group, our shareholders, it's working with our customers. I have relationships with some of our major customers groups. I have relationships with our major supplier groups, and so I spend a lot of time going through a lot of that work. But I tell you, the thing that I've learned, not just in the last 14 weeks in this job, but I'll tell you the last number of years, is to make sure you build in the time for reflection and for thinking about the future.
That's great
and
advice.
None of us, I think, is when you get into a role like you're both in and I'm in, and when you're pulled and tugged and you could always be doing something 24 hours a day, how do you build in that time to think about not only just what you just did, so how can I continually improve, but where are we going and where am I going? Both, and I think more about where we're going as an organization. All these, I think the question you started with was about how the outside world impacts us. How can I think ahead and think about passing along this great 120-year-old storied legacy of a company to the next generation and the next generation after? And so that only comes with a lot of thought, and that's not always easy to find that time, but it's important.
Fair.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
You did great. It's your first podcast. I feel like you're well set up.
Are you
going to
score me?
A career
Are you going to score me 9 or 10?
You have to send me a sheet.
The survey?
And then
Okay, we'll do that.
And then we'll score you.
I'll do that.
That's one. We got 4 more, and then we got to tell them what he can improve on.
Oh, yeah,
that's good.
True.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Bye.
It.